They call it locked-in syndrome, a medical term that sounds like the title of a cheap horror movie until you find yourself inside it. Imagine being bricked up inside a concrete wall, but they left a tiny crack for you to hear the world outside. You scream, but your vocal cords are paralyzed. You pound your fists, but your hands are entirely motionless. You are a ghost haunting your own body. My name is Victor Blackwood. I am 64 years old. I live in Austin, Texas, in a custom glass and concrete home in the hills of West Lake, overlooking the Colorado River. 30 years ago, I wrote 1,000 lines of code in a suffocating dorm room at the University of Texas. That code became the foundation for Aegis Security, one of the most exclusive and secretive cybersecurity firms in North America. We protect data. We build digital fortresses for government contractors, massive banks, and people whose names never appear in the press. I'm a man who is used to controlling everything, every transaction, every access protocol, every single variable in my life. I provided my wife, Veronica, with a lifestyle that even glossy magazines fail to accurately capture. I raised my son, Damien, and made him the chief executive officer of my empire. I thought my life was an impenetrable fortress. I was wrong. The fatal vulnerability is always inside the system. It happened on a rainy Tuesday. I was scheduled for a routine procedure on my carotid artery. Nothing critical, just a preventative measure recommended by my private physician. I remember the smell of the anesthesia. I remember the surgeon telling me to count backward from 10, 10, 9, 8. And then came the absolute dark. There was a complication during the anesthesia, a massive ischemic stroke right there on the operating table. When I finally woke up, I was in the intensive care unit at St. David's Medical Center. I could hear the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor. I could hear the rain lashing against the window. But I couldn't open my eyes. I couldn't even draw a breath. A machine was breathing for me. I was locked in. On the second day, I heard voices, footsteps on the linoleum floor, the squeak of the heavy door opening. The doctor walked in, and then they walked in. My wife, Veronica, and my son, Damien. The doctor spoke first. His voice was professionally sympathetic, but entirely clinical. He explained that the brain damage was extensive. He said I was in a deep coma, and the chances of me ever returning to a functional life were practically zero. He used words like vegetative state and artificial life support. I waited for Veronica to rush to my bedside. I waited for her to cry, to beg the doctor to fight to the bitter end. We had been married for 35 years, but the room fell into an absolute freezing silence. Then Veronica spoke. Her voice was steady, measured, not a single tremor of grief. She said, "Victor always hated weakness. He told me that if he ever became a burden, he would prefer to let go. Doctor, if his heart stops, do not resuscitate him. Unplug the machines. It is exactly what he would want." I had never said that in my entire life. Not once. My heart rate should have spiked. The monitors should have screamed from my silent panic, but the chemical coma held my physical body in an iron grip. I could only lay there and listen. But the worst was yet to come. My son, my own flesh and blood, Damien, stepped closer to the doctor. Damien's voice was strictly business, as if he were negotiating a vendor contract. He asked, "Just so I understand, doctor, if we sign the DNR and he passes, how quickly will the death certificate be issued? You see, we have an active merger with the Orion Group, an $800 million deal. Victor's biometric key is locking the master server. As long as he is legally alive but incapacitated, the assets are frozen. If he dies today, does the executive authority automatically transfer to me before Friday? Welcome. Hit that like button. Drop a comment below, letting me know where you are watching from. This story will show you exactly what happens when greedy people try to hack the architect of their own security. Make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss the ending. If he dies today, does the authority transfer to me? I was lying 3 feet away from him. My chest was rising and falling only because of a plastic tube in my throat, and my only son was asking if I would be cold enough for him to sell my life's work by the weekend. The human brain is a terrifying mechanism. When it is stripped of the ability to move, it funnels every ounce of its energy into pure survival. For the next 6 days, I stayed in the dark, and I listened. I listened to Veronica order interior design services over the phone, complaining that my home office always depressed her. I listened to Damien screaming at corporate lawyers, trying to find a legal loophole to bypass my biometric locks before my heart stopped. On the 7th day, the swelling in my brain began to recede. I remember the exact moment. The harsh, blinding light of the fluorescent ceiling fixtures pierced through my eyelids. I blinked. The nurse standing next to my bed dropped her clipboard on the floor. By that evening, I could weakly squeeze a hand. By the next morning, they removed the breathing tube. When Veronica and Damien walked into the room, all the color drained from their faces. They looked at me, not like a medical miracle, but like a massive liability that had just resurrected itself. But by the time they reached the bed, Veronica had already slipped on her flawless mask. She cried. She kissed my dry hands. Damien stood next to her, gripping my shoulder, telling me how terrified they had been. I looked at them. My facial muscles were weak, which worked entirely in my favor. I forced a frail, pathetic, elderly smile. I whispered, "I am so glad you are here. I had to become exactly what they wanted me to be. A broken, weak, expiring old man whose mind was shattered by a stroke. I knew that if I showed them even a fraction of my true awareness, they would immediately petition a judge to declare me legally incompetent. I needed to get back to my house. I needed access to my network. They discharged me 3 weeks later. I was in a wheelchair. My right hand had a slight tremor, a tremor I intentionally exaggerated whenever they were in the room. Damien wheeled me into the house and said, "Dad, do not worry about the company. The doctor said you need absolute peace and quiet. Any stress could trigger a second stroke. I have taken over all operational management. Just rest." I looked out the window and said, "Thank you, son. I trust you completely." Our home in Westlake Hills was massive. Veronica hired a daytime nurse, but in the evenings, I was left alone in my wing of the house. They thought I was sleeping. They didn't know that a security architect never builds a house without a back door. Inside my study, behind a false panel in the bookshelf, I kept an isolated server and an encrypted laptop that was never connected to our home Wi-Fi. It ran on a dedicated satellite uplink. On the 4th night after my return, when the house was completely silent, I stood up from my wheelchair. My legs were weak, but they held my weight. I locked the study door, pulled out the laptop, and logged into the system. I wasn't dead. I was invisible, and I began my hunt. If you want to know the absolute truth about a person, do not listen to a word they say. Look at their transaction history. I started with Damien. My son was in such a desperate rush to sell Aegis Security to the Orion Group that it made no logical sense. Aegis was incredibly profitable. Why rush a sale? It took me 4 hours and 3 custom scripts to bypass his personal cloud storage. What I found made me forget the weakness in my limbs. Damien wasn't just looking for a payout. He was in deep trouble. 2 years ago, he got heavily involved in cryptocurrency derivatives and algorithmic trading on unregulated offshore exchanges. He used massive leverage. When the market crashed, he found himself owing a Macanese syndicate over $20 million. But that wasn't the worst part. To cover the interest payments on his mob debt, my son, the CEO of a company protecting government databases, began selling zero-day exploits to brokers on the darknet. He was intentionally creating backdoors in our security patches and selling the keys. He was selling out our clients. He was committing federal treason. The Orion Group merger was his escape pod. He planned to take his cut of the sale, pay off the syndicate and disappear before the new owners ever audited the code and found the holes. And if I had died in the hospital, he wouldn't have had to explain a thing. I ripped every log, every transaction, and every encrypted chat message, saving it all to a secure external drive. Then I moved on to Veronica, my devoted wife who wanted to pull my plug. Veronica wasn't a hacker. She was a socialite. Tracking her was almost insultingly easy. I accessed her phone through the home router and pulled her location history and deleted messages. Her secret was incredibly cliché, but entirely disgusting. His name was Julian Ames. He owned a chain of luxury fitness clubs in Texas. He was 10 years younger than me, tan, and perfectly sculpted. They had been sleeping together for 3 years. But Veronica wasn't just having an affair. Julian was completely bankrupt. His fitness empire was collapsing under high-interest loans. And Veronica had been methodically, month by month, siphoning money from our joint family trusts into offshore shell companies, which miraculously turned around and invested directly into Julian's failing gyms. She had stolen $4 million of my money to fund her boy toys' delusions of grandeur. They both thought I was an old, sick fool. They thought my time was over. I sat in the dark of my study, the blue light of the monitor illuminating my surgical scars. I didn't feel anger. Anger is an emotion, and emotions lead to sloppy execution. I felt absolute freezing clarity. I wasn't just going to cut them out of my will, I was going to erase them from existence. Revenge should be executed like flawless code, elegant, ruthless, and fully automated. For the next 3 weeks, I played my part beautifully. During the day, I sat in my wheelchair on the patio, dropping a blanket off my lap, listening to Damien pace the floor inside, assuring the Orion Group executives that the merger was on schedule. I let Veronica kiss my forehead before she left for her supposed charity luncheons, while my tracker showed her pulling into Julian's penthouse parking garage. But at night, I built my masterpiece. Step 1 was the trust. Through a heavily encrypted video link, I contacted my personal attorneys. I proved I was fully lucid. I instructed them to create an entirely new, impenetrable, blind trust in Delaware. I moved 90% of my liquid assets, including the deed to the Austin estate, into that trust. Veronica thought she still had access to our millions. She didn't realize that for the last 2 weeks, I had routed her banking app through a mirror server. It showed her the old balances, but in reality, her cards were tied to an account holding exactly $5,000. Step 2 was the company. I was never going to let Damien sell Aegis Security, but I needed him to think he had won. Using my administrative God mode access, I quarantined the sector of the servers where Damien hid his stolen code and darknet receipts. I wrote a dead man switch script. At a specific time, it would automatically email the entire data dump, complete with Damien's digital signatures, directly to the cyber division of the FBI. Step 3 was the execution. The official signing of the merger documents was scheduled for Friday at 2 in the afternoon in the executive boardroom of our downtown Austin headquarters. On Thursday evening, Damien crouched next to my wheelchair. "Dad," he said, using his softest, most caring voice. "Tomorrow we finalize the Orion deal. You don't need to be there. It's too stressful. I will bring the final papers home for you to sign." I looked at him. I used my weakest, most pathetic rasp. "No, son, this company is my legacy. I want to be there. I want to see you finish what I started." He frowned slightly, but he couldn't argue. He needed my live retinal scan and fingerprint to unlock the master server and transfer ownership. "Fine, Dad, if it means that much to you." Friday afternoon. The boardroom on the 40th floor, floor-to-ceiling windows, showing the entire Austin skyline. Sitting at the massive black walnut table were the CEO of the Orion Group, his legal team, and my son. Damien was wearing a bespoke suit. He looked like the king of the world. Veronica was there too, playing the role of the supportive matriarch, wearing a dress that cost more than a luxury car. My nurse wheeled me up to the head of the table and stepped outside. "Victor, it is truly a blessing to see you up and around," the Orion CEO said with a polished smile. I gave a slow, weak nod. I kept my hands resting on the armrests. Damien stood up. He clicked a remote, and the projector hummed to life. The Aegis Company logo filled the screen behind him. "Gentlemen," my son announced, radiating absolute confidence. "Today, we are not just closing a deal. We are merging two titans of industry. The audits are clean. The financials are flawless. The only thing left is the transfer of the master biometric keys, and we sign the paperwork." He walked over to my wheelchair, holding a portable biometric scanner. "Dad, just press your thumb right here." The room went dead silent. Veronica held her breath, waiting for the old fool to hand over the keys to the kingdom. I looked at the scanner. Then I looked at Damien, and I stood up. I didn't lean on the armrests. My legs were perfectly solid. I straightened my spine. The fake tremor in my hands vanished completely. I stood at my full height, towering over my son. Damien's perfect smile melted off his face. He took a stumbling step backward. "Dad? What are you doing?" "You can't stand." I snatched the scanner out of his hand and dropped it onto the table. The plastic clattered loudly against the wood. "You are absolutely right, Damien," I said. My voice was deep, resonant, and commanded the entire room. It was the voice of a man who had run an empire for 30 years. The audits are clean, just not the audits you were expecting. I reached into my suit jacket, pulled out my smartphone, tapped the screen once, and placed it on the table. The projector behind Damien flashed. The company logo disappeared. In its place was a massive spreadsheet, offshore banking records, Macau casino transfers. What the hell is this? The Orion CEO demanded, sitting up straight. This, gentleman, I said, staring directly into my son's terrified eyes, is undeniable proof that my CEO, my own flesh and blood, owes $23 million to a Chinese gambling syndicate, and to pay the interest on that debt. The screen flashed again. Lines of source code and darknet transaction logs filled the wall. He has been intentionally creating backdoors in our security architecture and selling zero-day exploits to the highest bidder on the dark web. He was selling out our clients, and he was about to sell this company to you just so he could take the cash and vanish before you realized you bought a compromised system. The Orion lawyers shot up from their chairs. The CEO stared at Damien in pure horror. Dad, this is insane. Damien shrieked, his voice cracking with panic. He looked at the Orion executives. He had a stroke. He's hallucinating. This is all fake. My brain works like a quantum computer, Damien, I said, taking a slow step toward him. I wrote the script that harvested this data 3 weeks ago. I sat in that wheelchair, eating pureed garbage, and listened to you orchestrate the timeline of my death. Veronica jumped out of her chair. Her face was a mask of absolute terror. Victor, stop this right now. You are destroying the family. I turned my head slowly to look at her. The projector flashed one more time. High-definition photographs of Veronica and Julian Ames walking out of a boutique hotel, followed by wire transfer receipts from our family trust to his failing LLCs. Family? Veronica? I spit the word out like poison. Our family died the second you stood over my hospital bed and told the doctor to pull my plug just so you could keep funding your bankrupt personal trainer with my money. The boardroom was entirely paralyzed. You could hear the wind pushing against the glass windows. Your accounts are frozen, Veronica. The house is locked in a blind trust and hits the market on Monday. Your credit cards were deactivated exactly 1 hour ago. Under the infidelity clause of our prenuptial agreement, you get absolutely nothing. I left exactly $5,000 in your checking account. That should cover your Uber ride to your boyfriend's apartment. I hope you enjoy poverty. She let out a suffocated gasp, clutching her chest like she had been shot. I turned back to Damien. He was physically shaking, his bespoke suit trembling against his frame. You asked the doctor how fast the authority would transfer to you if I died, Damien. You were in a terrible rush. I checked my watch. 2:12 in the afternoon. 2 minutes ago, I said quietly. An automated data packet containing your crypto wallets, your darknet logs, and your syndicate communications was successfully delivered to the cyber division of the FBI. My building security has already locked down the elevators. They are on their way up right now. No, please, Dad. Damien collapsed onto his knees right there on the corporate carpet. He grabbed my pant leg, sobbing uncontrollably. I'm your son. Please cancel the send. I'll fix it. I'm your son. I looked down at him. I remembered the cold, mechanical hum of the ventilator. My son died in the ICU when he decided my death was a solid exit strategy, I said. I firmly peeled his shaking hands off my suit. At that exact second, the heavy glass doors of the boardroom swung open. 5 men in windbreakers with FBI printed in bold yellow letters walked in. They didn't ask questions. They already had the warrants. The Orion Group executives silently packed their briefcases and fled the room. There was no merger. There was only ash. I watched them put handcuffs on my crying son. I watched Veronica slide down the wall, burying her face in her hands as her entire universe was wiped out of existence. I adjusted my tie, turned around, and walked out of the boardroom, leaving the empty wheelchair sitting at the table. I live in Montana now. I own a ranch where the cell service only works when the wind blows in the right direction. Aegis Security was restructured, sanitized, and sold to a defense contractor for over $1 billion. Damien is currently serving 20 years in a federal penitentiary for corporate espionage and wire fraud. The Macau syndicate knows exactly which facility he is housed in. I highly doubt he will see parole. Veronica tried to hire a divorce attorney, but they all dropped her the second they realized she had no access to any funds. The last I heard, she was working the reception desk at a mid-tier salon on the outskirts of Houston. Julie and Ames dumped her 3 weeks after the money stopped flowing. Sometimes I sit on my porch, look at the mountains, and remember the beep of that heart monitor, the sound that was supposed to be my expiration date. But in my line of work, we have a saying: every fatal error is just a chance to rewrite the code. They wanted me dead. I gave them exactly what they asked for. The old Victor Blackwood died on that operating table. The man who woke up doesn't leave vulnerabilities in the system. If this story made you rethink who you trust with your life, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments exactly what you would have done